Good morning, everyone. Hope you enjoyed the keynote and had a chance to catch some coffee. It's been, for me at least, a great couple of days. I hope you've been learning as much as I have. Ton of really interesting stuff, and I'm an industry analyst. Spend a lot of our time at big tech vendor conferences, and I think there was one thing that's really come through particularly strongly is the theming about developer empowerment. And I think that's a super important issue, one that I'll talk a bit about in terms of RedMonk, my company, and how we see the world. So I think in the agenda it was when Java shops grow up, they turn into web companies or thereabouts. I tried to sharpen up the title, Cloud for Java Natives. So I'm Monkchips. My name is James Governor. I'm founder of an analyst company called RedMonk. We are quite different from the sort of Gartners of the world in that we try and look at tech adoption through the lens of the practitioner rather than the purchaser. So it's not all about trying to chase the CIO, although I apparently will be talking to some CIOs later. It's much more what are developers choosing, why are they choosing it, and how are they choosing it. Now, when we started with this model back in 2002, I think we were outliers. People were kind of like, well, development is something that we outsource. We do the requirements and we send it offshore and everything's going to be good. But it obviously wasn't good. So in those intervening years, I think some of what we're talking about, obviously with the arrival of open source, the social revolution around technologies such as GitHub, it means that developers don't need to ask for permission anymore. So we're living in a kind of permissionless era. We heard yesterday, it's the end run around the DBA. The DBA doesn't want you touching the database. The sysadmins don't want you touching servers. And so what does the world look like when developers are allowed to make choices? And really, that's what RedMonk is about. So we started our analysis really from a qualitative perspective, mostly through talking to developers about their choices, about their experiences, why they were making the choices they did, spend a lot of time in and around open source and web companies trying to understand their choices as much as we see in the enterprise. And I think it's that bridging that helps. We've latterly begun to do some quantitative stuff. We were always skeptical about some of the models that we saw in this business because, again, prime example would have been Linux distributions. So if you want to track Linux distributions and you're a traditional analyst company, you go to all the vendors and you say, so how many boxes did you ship pre-installed with Linux this quarter? And then you say, aha, there are only two Linux distributions that matter. That's Red Hat and SUSE. In fact, it boils down to one, Red Hat. That's fine, but of course, if you're actually looking at developers and what they're doing in their daily lives and you're ignoring Ubuntu, then you're kind of missing a huge amount of the story. So what we've seen now is that there are these sort of digital breadcrumbs that are now available because developers are sharing so much of what they do on platforms like Stack Overflow, GitHub, and you can begin to get a model of what's going on. So something like this, yeah, it's not actually tracking adoption of a technology, but what is very clear is that there is a huge amount of spike of conversation around the technology spark. So it's a leading indicator of something, and that's the kind of quantitative stuff that we do. So we live in an era of disruption. Unicorns is not enough, so now you have to have cats, laser beams, and other good stuff. We heard it this morning again. McKesson's talking about why didn't we get the memo that software is eating the world. Uber is going to change transportation. All the car companies are now wondering what that means for them. Airbnb does more bookings than most of the hotel companies combined. We kind of know these stories. We know these platform stories. So there's a whole bunch of disruption. Disruption is the buzzword. We used to call it innovation, but in Silicon Valley we call it disruption. But there is real disruption in the world happening as well that we have to deal with. You may not know who this guy is, this clown. His name is Boris Johnson. And in the UK, he led the campaign for what has been called the Brexit. So this is England leaving the European Union. And let me tell you, we talk about disruption a lot, but you want to see real disruption, it's what can happen at geopolitical scale. Overnight, the pound lost about 13 to 14% of its value. I'm paid in dollars, so that was pretty awesome. But it's kind of scary. It's triggered paroxysms for US companies that think, okay, we can go to the UK and trade from there across Europe. That choice may no longer be open to them. So it's sort of opened up, well, okay, we need to get data in the cloud. We need that the cloud providers can provide much better geo location than they have. They're all scrambling to get their Frankfurt data centers open so that financial services can move there. And I think the key is there's just disruption in all kinds of vectors in the world today. So how do you respond to that? Well, one of the ways that you respond to it, and in fact, part of the disruption is this fragmentation that we're going on. Like it used to be, when I first started in this business, it was like Java and .NET. There were two choices, you knew what was happening. Database, you're going to be an Oracle shop, maybe you're doing SQL Server if you're on the .NET side. But we've just seen this incredible profusion, really driven by, as I say, the fact that GitHub is now there. You look at JavaScript, there's a new JavaScript framework pretty much every week. Trying to keep track of that as a full-time job in its own. We're going to do React, we're going to do Angular, they're going to get superseded before you know it. Developers like to choose the bright and shiny stuff, so they're going to be like, okay, this is the best tool for the job now. In many cases, it's true. So databases, it used to be, yes, we had the relational database, we knew what we were choosing. Now someone's coming in and saying, oh no, we need to use a document database for this. We're going to use Mongo, or oh no, I know, there's this Neo4j thing, we can do graph database because we need to traverse that kind of tree. There's just a huge amount of choices, which is great fun, but of course it creates a lot of challenges. It used to be, I think, that sort of IT for the developer was like you're farming. You're in your cubicle, and your head's down, and you're digging, and they put a fence around you. You are just doing Java. You are just using WebSphere or WebLogic or whatever it is. Life kind of sucks. Today, it's kind of more like foraging. Your head is up, you're looking around, you can go to GitHub, you can download any software you want, you can get it spun up on an Amazon instance, and just be done with it. And so there's this huge opportunity. But what's interesting is there's some stability at the core. So at Redmonk, we do this programming language ranking on a regular basis. Funnily enough, they don't change that quickly. So we used to do it quarterly. We've kind of dialed it back to twice a year. What's been very interesting to us, and what we basically do is look at popularity rank across GitHub, and then the conversations in Stack Overflow on a tag basis, and see if there's a correlation. And this scatter plot shows that clearly there is. And what we've seen is that Java and JavaScript, JavaScript is huge, there's no doubt about it. But I think that given it's not so long ago that people out there were saying Java is dead, or Java is a dead end, certainly some of my colleagues in the analyst business and other firms were saying that, this is super interesting. So what are some things that have moved quickly? Go has emerged as a language that's interesting for systems programming. Swift, fastest growing programming language we ever saw in terms of interest. Although there comes a point where, obviously growth begins to slow. What we found interesting about Java is just its continued interest and dominance in this industry. There's been a fall, or there's been a rise and a fall and a rise again of Java. I don't know whether I'd say that Java was cool, but it's definitely relevant. So when web companies grow up, they turn into Java shops. This is one of the things that kind of got me, because you had industry analysts telling the enterprise, oh, that Java's dead. And then you look at companies like Twitter or Amazon and so on, they're all using Java. So Twitter didn't begin as a Java shop, but it turned into one. I'm going to talk a little bit about the journeys they've all been on. But it's very clear that these are companies that we're expected to look up to. These are the cloud native companies. They're using Java. It's not universal, but what's interesting is that quite often they began saying that Java sucked, and then ended up turning around and saying, well, actually, this is something we need to use. Of course, that is not to say that they are JEE shops. So New World Java, there's all sorts of choices out there. Basically, a ton of runtimes. Netty has been very interesting. We're seeing a lot of that. That's cloud native. Lightbend is really interesting, because one of the things we heard was, oh, Java sucks, but the JVM is good. So you should use Scala. Scala's a big deal. Everyone's going to use Scala now. Well, Scala's pretty hard. And from when you've got a ton of developers that know Java, are they really going to go and learn Scala when the syntax is completely different and there are a bunch of challenges there? Lightbend, I don't know, have any of you heard of a company called TypeSafe? So TypeSafe was basically formed to commercialize Scala. And their big thing was, oh yeah, financial services and web companies are going to use Scala, so it's going to become a big deal. Recently, they've renamed the company, it's Lightbend, and they're going Java first. So the fact that a company that was reacting to that, they were part of this movement saying, oh no, the JVM is good, but not the language, has decided that actually Java is something they need to support, I think is notable. So Twitter is interesting to me because we celebrated failure, downtime. I used to love it. It was like, oh good, I can get a moment's peace because Twitter is down. I can breathe and relax. A lot of people, when Twitter had its initial scaling problems, were like kind of, oh, I could have done better. Why didn't they just use a CEP platform? They could have got something off the shelf. I could have done it on a weekend. Well, kind of good luck with that. And the simple fact is, if they had have set out initially to scale to the extent they now have, they'd probably still be there on the whiteboard trying to work out how to do this. 2010, they had an interesting experience. I mean, initially it was a Ruby shop. 2010, President Dmitry Medvedev of Russia was, I believe, actually visiting with Twitter. And they realized that from the Russian perspective, there was going to be so much traffic that the system was going to immediately fall down. They had to create a special Dmitry Medvedev server, sort of a hack, to deal with the traffic there. And they said, well, this cannot stand. And obviously, something like the US elections, I mean, look at the amount of traffic. I mean, certainly, I'm hating it. I don't know about you, but there's too much news at the moment. They're the people that have to deliver on that, and some of the fan outs they have to do are just incredible. I mean, literally millions of messages to billions of people spreading out across a tree. And so what did they do? They went with the JVM. They've joined the Java community process. They're part of that. I mean, Twitter is very much now a Java citizen. And that may not have been where they started, but in order to scale, it's what they had to do. The fail well, I mean, there are people with fail well tattoos. And we all, there are some people here with gray hair. We used to think that we were aiming for, that downtime was a bad thing. No, downtime is something that people will now tattoo on themselves. So Facebook, it started off very much, oh no, we're PHP, Java sucks, we're not going to do this. That's a bad approach. But then when they wanted to, really start analyzing some of the stuff that was in their messages, they're like, okay, we're going to build a database for this. And they built Cassandra. And they thought that was good. They used Java for that. That was the choice that the engineer made. They said that in order to scale that was the best idea. And then latterly, actually, what ended up happening was they said, actually, this still isn't scalable enough. We're going to go with Hadoop. And so now Facebook is probably the biggest Hadoop shop on the planet. It is absurd how much data they're putting through Hadoop. And if you're the biggest Hadoop shop on the planet, then you're clearly a Java shop. Hadoop itself, I think, is very interesting because Hadoop came out of Yahoo. Again, native web company, builds technology, throws it over the transom. Basically their thing was they had this real estate of all of these servers, and they wanted that their analysts could analyze more data quickly and have access to more resources. So it was designed to scale out across their servers. And I think what's interesting is Doug Cutting, the original architect, when they asked him, hey, Doug, we want you to build this thing for us, and we'd like you to do it in something, you're going to do it in one of those modern languages, right? You're going to use Ruby or something. And he said, no, I'm going to do it in Java. And they said, no, but Java sucks. Come on, do something cool. And he said, well, do you want me to build a maintainable system? Do you want me to build something that will scale and that can be managed over time? And if you do, then it's going to be Java. So I think that Hadoop has been a big part of the Java renaissance. So companies like Etsy. Etsy are fantastic, by the way. I mean, if you're interested in DevOps, track what they do around this notion of Coders Craft. They share a ton of information about how they scale their systems. John Alspor works there, and he's just a gold mine of information about how to build resilient systems, how to build systems that will basically degrade gracefully. And Etsy, again, they began as, we're a PHP shop, we don't really do Java, but of course today, from where are we going to find developers to build these services? Actually, Etsy just had a pretty good quarter. How do we do this? Well, we want good developers that can build for us. So Java is now a standard for them. So let's look at this dude. We know that Amazon is obviously kind of redefining numerous industries. One of the things, the questions that I think that the enterprise is very interested in, you look at Amazon, it's like, oh yeah, they're amazing. Like, how can we do that? Well, it's important to remember that actually Amazon started as a complete piece of crap. I mean, it was a hairball. It was the usual kind of Java application. Same actually in all of your shops, probably less good. They didn't begin with this service-oriented architecture where they could do all of this cool stuff. What I would advise you to do is read, there's a couple of emails. There's a guy called Steve Yegge that moved from Amazon to Google, and he thought he was sharing a memo internally. But he actually published it to the entire internet. And it was about kind of the journey that Amazon was on and how they began to become more effective at this stuff. And the basic thing was, look, everything is going to be published as APIs. There will be no hidden calls internally between teams. Everything needs to be a service interface. There will be no direct calls to the database. Anybody that doesn't do this will get fired. And yeah, so when Jeff Bezos says something like that, that's what's going to happen. It was a complete top-down mandate, but that was part of the journey that we're on, that they were on, that's now enabled them to become this incredible company. So very much, part of the transition in making a Java system that was, and we used to call it SOA. I mean, it's not fashionable to do that anymore, but that was at the time what Amazon did. But yes, it was a top-down mandate. They're going to kick the shit out of you if you didn't become part of this. And I think when I look at the customers that we've seen here the last couple of days, this is super interesting to me because they've all talked about that. You need the top-down and the bottom-up mandate. You need a bit of both. So this is Hackney Marshes, near where I live in London. The theme here is grassroots. So this is grassroots football, or many of you probably call it soccer. So this is just a huge area of land where people go out and play football on a Sunday afternoon. You've got to support the bottom-up efforts of developers now. How many of you are actually developers? Okay, any architects? Good mixture of both. Well, hopefully, one of the things that we're seeing, I mean, there's been an adversarial relationship between developers and architects over the last few years. And I think that what we're seeing is that architect groups are now much more talking about the sort of developer experience, how to make life better for their developers now, how to make things better for the grassroots. Netflix. Netflix is another one because Adrian Cockcroft tells, I mean, he may tell the story tomorrow. I hope I don't steal his thunder, but Adrian tells this great story, which is people keep coming to me at Netflix, because Netflix is amazing, right? But, they're touted as just this awesome company. And the fact that when Amazon fell over soon after releasing their video product, and Netflix was still running even though it ran on Amazon Web Services, that's pretty amazing because of the engineering they're doing. Again, they share all of that. They share the code. They share the knowledge. They share the experiences. They invest heavily in people. And that's the thing that Adrian says, because enterprises would come, yeah, but Adrian, come on, you're Netflix. Like, we can't compete with you. Where did you find all of those amazing developers? And he would always look at the Fortune 500 company, the CIO, he'd look them in the eye and he'd say, oh, it's easy. We hired them from you. They invested in those people. They offer amazing packages. The relocation is fantastic. They help them find a house. This is scary for the enterprise, the idea that we're going to support developers in this way. But if we want to compete with the Netflixes and so on, we need to be doing some of the stuff they are. Human resources is not something that it's about treating people right, and they're going to do better work for you. We used to have, developers don't need to understand the business. They just need to do as they're told. That makes no sense. All of these successful companies are run by engineers. So it's about empowering engineers to work with the business to be more effective. Open source is very much part of this new normal. I think what's interesting to me is the technology that used to be built by vendors is very often built by these companies that have no real intention of selling it or whatever. I mean, Kafka, if we look at, Netflix on a regular basis just drops technology and says, well, somebody else can go and commercialize it if they want. It's out of an outgrowth of what they do. But open source is absolutely part of the transition. And it is part of these companies' success. So, if you're in a shop where you can't make open source contributions and you'd like to, the war for talent is there. Maybe you should get a different job. If you're running an IT shop and you're not allowing your developers to contribute to open source, then you're self-selecting for developers that are probably not as good. The best developers at the moment are thinking, this is part of a community I want to be part of. I want to learn, I want to share, I want to move on in my career. And even to the extent that now you're in a position where you can see people that will build a code base, it ends up going with them. So Brendan Burns built Kubernetes at Google, recently joined Microsoft. Microsoft is going to be doing stuff around Kubernetes now. It's sort of a patronage model. You can take the code with you, and that's increasingly an expectation. Nothing to see here. So Tim Bray, interesting guy, one of the writers of the XML spec, also loves to say that other things are overly complicated, which is irony, I think. So he said that Java, there was nothing interesting happening in Java. This was like 2006. He said, Java's boring. All the interesting innovations in like Ruby. He actually did this. He also said that Ruby on Rails was more maintainable and PHP was more scalable. Some of this stuff has been scientifically proven to be false in the interim. But I think when we look at these projects, I mean, Chaos Monkey or Spark, Kafka, this stuff is very interesting core technology. It's built in Java, so a couple of those are JVM examples, Kafka and Spark are both written in Scala. I certainly didn't mean to say that everything is pure Java, but the Java ecosystem is in pretty rude health. And Jenkins is absolutely core. I mean, who here is using Jenkins? Awesome. So basically, in terms of the journey that we're on to developing more effectively, what started as somebody just like banging away on a machine under their desk, Kazuki Kawaguchi at Sun Microsystems, has now kind of redefined how a lot of people do their work. So Cloud Native Computing Foundation, because we're all like, oh, Cloud Native, everything has to be Cloud Native. What's interesting to me is if you look at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, their definition says it has to be container-based. Not surprising, given that they're all about container standardization. I think the 12-factor app, which I've heard mentioned a couple of times in the last couple of days, is probably a better definition of Cloud Native, and you should check it out and think about what are the implications for you in building applications at scale. They're likely to be stateless. You've got to think about how they fail, because they will fail. That's an expectation. I'm sure you've heard the cattle versus pets thing. We've tended to treat our servers like pets. We want to feed and water them and cuddle them. We get real upset when they die. Well, that's just not valid anymore. We need an approach where, if we lose some cattle, that's actually going to be okay. That's an expectation. That creates significant challenges for the persistence tier, but increasingly applications are stateless. And whether you're building in Java or whatever programming language, this is the way that's going to enable you to do all of this fun kind of DevOps-y stuff. So microservices, Martin Fowler came up with this definition. Cote's definition is probably a little bit clearer. Cote is a wonderful guy. If you don't follow him, you should. He's full of homespun wisdom. Super smart guy. Used to work for me, but was smart enough to quit and move on. He's now at Pivotal. This testing thing. I think people thought, there's a lot of people that originally were like, oh, the thing about Agile is they do no testing. Of course, that's bullshit. Agile is all about testing. It's all about testing. It is all about being test-driven. And we used to see in riveting, if you had someone different doing the riveting from the QA, the quality would drop. Because you could just sit around, I've done all my rivets for the day, I'm going home, see you later. And then the plane would crash or the ship would sink or whatever. You have to have the same people doing the QA, same people having responsibility for the code they write in order that it's more effective. What's interesting to me is that actually, from a CI perspective, which is foundational to this, if you want to do microservices, you've got to start actually with continuous integration and testing. Bitnami survey, and it's extraordinary to me that you're looking at the number of respondents that are not doing any automated testing. And these are people that are using cloud technology. So start doing continuous integration. Concourse is interesting technology from Pivotal, actually. But Jenkins is clearly the industry standard. If you are going to be doing continuous integration, it makes sense to look at containers. They're not production ready. There's a big war out there. It's kind of interesting. Do any of you follow a guy called Solomon Hykes? Or in fact, do any of you use Docker? Interesting. OK. I think there's, at the moment, a bit of a disjunction between the Java world and the tool chains that have been made. It's like, well, we've already got our tool chains. We don't necessarily need that. But for spinning up an image, in theory, that is going to be the same on your development machine or in production or anywhere you run it, it's just a very, very elegant technology for doing that. And there's this whole sort of big standards war around that. You've got Google Kubernetes, HashiCorp, Vagrant. I'm sure many of you have used that tool. But it's building applications in a different way, not with the expectation that you're going to keep them forever, but actually they're probably going to get thrown away. I mean, one of the things about this, we do 4,000 commits a day or whatever, is that actually you're saying a lot of the code you write, it's just not going to last very long. There's no point writing something that's going to last forever. And a lot of these containers, you're actually spinning them up just to create a development environment and then getting rid of it. It's about getting rid of stuff. It's about disposability as much as building. Infrastructure as code. This is absolutely key to the way the web companies are building stuff right now. So you need an approach to this. I mean, obviously in the Cloud Foundry world, that's a well-bounded environment already. But I'm assuming that you're not all on CF. And I think the key here is that whilst a lot of people say DevOps is not about the tools, it actually is about the tools. These tools were built with DevOps in mind. They were specifically built as a generation of tools that were all about automation so that you could do things more effectively. I mean, like if you want to do Heartbleed remediation or something, yeah, if you're relying on Cold Fusion, that's easy. But if you've got your own servers, you need automation for that. So one of the things that the web companies do, they know these systems are going to break. You never expect that the system you built will never fail. And it's really thinking about, well, how do we deal with that when that failure happens? And I think that's consistent across every cloud-native company. We talked about the 2 Pizza Box team yesterday. I think I quoted Phil Webb on that. If you put 2 pizza boxes down, a team will form around it, and then you have DevOps. That got retweeted, I think, 80, 90 times yesterday. Great comment. I'm trying to be a little bit less bro about it, so I talk about the tapas table. Like one of the things is have small teams that work together, that eat together, and think about breaking down not just the monolithic architectures of code you have, but the monolithic teams. And it's about bringing together perhaps that have different disciplines. It might be the database people with the network people, with the developer, with the designer. Small teams working together are able to manage code and know about it in a sense that there's a shared norm within that team rather than hoping that you've written everything down about it so that someone else will be able to manage it after the fact. And definitely if you've got a completely different team doing your ops than are doing your development, then you're doing it wrong. I mean, you do need to move to an approach where you are bringing together responsibility for the service at an engineering level. Culture is one of the big things here. We've been pretty big on blame culture and sort of, we've been through this. I mean, talking to a friend of mine where literally, if there was a problem at the bank he worked at, the bankers would demand that someone from IT got fired. That was like, they had to be given meat because something had gone wrong, which, not completely surprising from investment bankers, but there you go. Just culture is something that Etsy talks about, and they talk about the blameless post-mortem. We're living in a world where things will fail. What can we learn from them? Again, if you're trying to build web-scale systems, if you're trying to build systems that are going to scale for millions of users, reading Amazon's post-mortems for when something has gone wrong, that's the best place you can learn how to build systems that don't fail catastrophically. So, your team may not look like this, right? So you want to be, we're going to be doing all of the cloud-native stuff. This is Harper Lee. He's an amazing developer. He came in and cleaned up the healthcare.gov mess. Awesome guy, but we're not all, well, actually, I guess a lot of us are quite hairy these days. But your office may not look like this. We can't all, expect to be, buying some nice South of Market shiny office. This is heavy bit. That's okay. You don't have to look like that, but you can learn some of the lessons and apply them to the systems that you're building. And you do need to do this. This is sort of non-optional. It's time to make some progress. If we want to compete with these companies that were created 3 years ago, then we're going to have to accept that the processes change. Although I have to say, I think my speaker release form for this conference was a Word doc, which I was supposed to sign and fax back. We saw Citi yesterday, and that was, I think Citi, the thing that is super interesting to me about Citi is that they are hiring Amazon talent. And I'm talking about the war for talent. Let me tell you, Amazon pays super well. It's a really stressful environment, but they pay super well. And because it's not just one. There's a team of them now. They've hired like 5. It's going to probably be 10 people from Amazon coming to join Citi to do this. Walmart Labs has the biggest cadre of Node.js talent on the planet right now. They're making open source contributions. They're releasing cloud management platforms now. And the idea that Walmart is making open source contributions is kind of weird, because you're like, all Walmart does is sweat the supplier. Well, now they are the supplier. That's super interesting. Capital One are all over this. They're like desperate to be hiring. They're sponsoring tech conferences. They're all about, they're doing serverless, all of the cool stuff, because it's all about the war for talent. Daily Mail and General Trust. I'm sure some of you may have ended up at the Daily Mail website on some occasion, the sidebar of shame. Suddenly it's like, oh my God, I did not mean to end up at this website. They drive a ton of traffic. But DMGT is interesting just because they're building B2B services in the way that a startup would. There's a guy called Joe Emerson there. He's talking the language of product market fit, and they'll be like, could you build us a Zillow but B2B for commercial property? And he'll go out and build that. Again, he's an amazing web talent, and they've said, we need to bring him in as part of the transformation that we're making. So not everybody in your shop is going to be like that, but you do need some people in there to learn from. Start with culture. It's got to be both bottom up and top down. And honestly, if you're a developer and you're working in a shop where you're not being respected, work on your skills, get a different job. If you're running an organization and you're not treating your developers right, then you better fix up because they've got choices. I mean, I'm used to going to tech conferences where all the vendors are like, or all the startups are like, we're hiring. Now it's the companies that were on that last slide. These are traditional enterprises. They want to hire the top talent. There is a war for talent. There are other jobs available. Make open source contributions. As an organization, you're going to write better code, you're going to have better interfaces, you're going to have better documentation if you actually make open source contributions. And if your organization doesn't allow it, again, choice is yours. Containers, the new hotness, developer pipelines. Read Brewer. I mean, you have to make engineering trade-offs. I think that we used to have this notion that everything was 5 nines. That was what we used to try and strive for. It doesn't make any sense. What are the things that actually need to be up at any given time? Does it matter if the data is not consistent right now? Java's definitely part of this new world. And I think that the main thing is people talk about an organizational revolution. It's a social revolution. It is about treating people better, small teams, and you will be more effective. And I think that when we look at the teams that, when we look at the organization, put it this way, I may invest in Citi after the presentation yesterday, because I think the transition they're making clearly is going to pay significant financial benefits. So yes, it's the new kind of era of empathy and goodness. And on that note, I hope you enjoy your journey to becoming web natives, cloud natives. Thank you.